Hello, ladies and gents. It's Justin Johnson, one of the academics of A328 Arts and Humanities, Asian land empires, the Ottomans and Mughals. Page 55. The process of Rajput co-option was complex. Abkar was aware that the Rajput's large population, military, and economic value to the empire meant negotiation and accommodation were key. Abkar further cemented the Mughal Rajput relationship by marrying Rajput princes such as Jodha Bayar, mother of Emperor Jahangir, but he didn't force them to convert to Islam. This co-option was also an incremental process. In 1561, for example, the Karchawara Rajput clan, based in Ajmer, become the first to enter into matrimonial alliance with the Mughals. By providing heirs for dynastic continuity, women played an important role in consolidating and expanding the Mughal power base and its networks. These elite women were conduits for property, the capital and connection between elite families as the Mughal Empire evolved. They played an increasingly important role in the Mughal politics and in how the empire worked, which we'll explore in more detail in Unit 8. The matrimonial alliances set off a domino effect. The Karchwara Rajputs used the Mughal alliance against Rajput rivals. Other Rajput clans subsequently allied themselves with the Mughals for their own advantage. Rajput leaders also served as commanders in the Mughal armed forces, including against other Hindu powers. Agra is now a local administrative centre and tourist site, but was formerly the Mughal capital and forms a complementary example to Ottoman Constantinople, which you studied earlier this week. By the Lodi Sultanate that preceded the Mughals is often called the Delhi Sultanate. Its capital was in fact based in Agra. This is where Babur established his capital too. However, the capital moved around frequently based on location of the Mughal imperial armies. How did Babur and Akbar turn Agra into the Mughal imperial capital and a cosmopolitan centre? Babur especially wished to construct a formal garden there, but his initial impression was poor. We crossed the Juma water to look at garden grounds a few days after entering Agra. Those grounds were so bad and unattractive that we traversed them with 100 disgusts and repulsions. So ugly and displeasing were they that the idea of making a Shaba Persian-style garden in them passed from my mind. But needs must, as there was no other land near Agra. The same ground was taken in hand a few days later. Babur used imperial revenues to construct gardens, watercourses, baths, tanks, and wells. As he explained in the memoirs, three things oppressed us in Hindustan: its heat, its violent winds, its dust. Against all three, the bath is a protection, for in it what is known of dust and wind. The type of imperial discourse was common. The British, when they ruled India, said much the same thing, and it's important for understanding how imperial rulers framed their superiority and right to rule over others in terms of exercise and what they thought was a civilizing influence. Akbar, like his Ottoman counterpart, Suleiman, commissioned fast building works in the capital as a way of legitimising imperial rule, emphasising its strength and bolstering economic power through urbanisation. Akbar's military power was materially demonstrated through the construction of the huge Red Fort. Architecture was a key aspect of how imperial power was expressed, both materially and culturally. This has been most universal throughout the imperial history. Think of the Egyptian pyramids and of the colonial statues and monuments built across British India. The emperor's patronage of scholarship, arts, and religion attracted practitioners from across Asia and Europe. One vital aspect of Agra's status was its extensive complex of bazaars, which became a fulcrum of transcontinental trade. Sided, aided by the transport network built in the course of the Mughal military campaigns that connected the city to other parts of the empire. By 1600, Agra had over 500,000 inhabitants and was the largest city in the world, behind Beijing and Constantinople. At the time, London's population was just 125,000. The capital benefited from the empire's agriculture and commercial prosperity, of which the imperial state took a percentage via taxation. This example shows how the consolidation and concentration of imperial rule in a particular space had dramatic effects, both within the environs of Agra and throughout the empire and beyond. There are several important points of comparison here within this unit and this block. The Ottomans, the Mughals, and Chinese empires viewed revenue from agriculture as a key component of their power, aiming for relatively low but stable rates of agrarian taxation. But how much did they differ? The Mughals and Ottomans devolved large areas of revenue collected to local, often military-based elites, whereas China, as you'll see in Block 3, Unit 11, raised taxation through a more highly centralised bureaucratic process. Jawaharlal Nehru, the first Prime Minister of independent India, provides one particularly evocative example of how early rule was remembered. Imprisoned by the British during the Second World War for his anti-colonial activities, he wrote a series of letters to his daughter, Indira, who herself became Prime Minister of India in 1970 before being assassinated by her bodyguards. These letters run into 1,200 pages, written entirely from Nehru's memory, were an astonishing account of the world's history from a colonial prison cell. It's a very good example how Babur and Akbar were remembered among the Indian political elite prior to the independence of 1947. Skim, read this extract from Jawaharlal Nehru's glimpse of the world history, in which describes the reigns of Babur and Akbar. As you read, consider the following. What impressions does Nehru have of Babur and Akbar? Reflecting on your studies, do you agree with Nehru's views on these studies? Let's just come back to India. We have spent some time over Europe and in many a letter tried to look under the turmoil and struggle and warfare and to understand what was happening there during the 16th and 17th centuries. I wonder what impression you have gathered of this period in Europe. Whatever your impressions may be, they must be very mixed. And that is not surprising, for Europe was a very mixed and curious place just then. Continuous and barbarous warfare, religious bigotry and cruelty unmatched in history, autocracy and divine rights of kings, a degenerate aristocracy and shameless exploitation of people. China seemed to be ages ahead of all this. She was cultured, artistic, tolerant and more or less peaceful country. India, in spite distribution degeneration compared favorably in many ways, but Europe also showed different and pleasanter face. There were the beginnings of modern science visible, and the idea of popular freedom begins to grow and shake the thrones of kings. Underneath, underneath these and the cause of these and the most of the activities is the commercial and industrial development of the Western and Northwestern European countries. Large cities grow up full of merchants trading with distant countries and humming with the industrial activity of the artisans all over the Western Europe. Craft guilds, that is, association of artisans and craftsmen, grow up. These merchant industrial classes from the bourgeoisie, the new middle class, this class grows, but it finds many obstacles, political, social, and religious. In politics and social organisation, these are the remains of the feudal system. This system belonged to an age that was past and did not fit in with the new conditions and hindered trade and industry. Feudal lords used to charge all manner of tolls and taxes, which irritated the trading classes. So the bourgeoisie set itself out to remove this class from power. The king did not like the feudal nobles either, as they wanted to encroach on his power. So the king of the bourgeoisie became allies against the feudal lords and deprived them of real influence. As a result, the king becomes more powerful, autocratic. In the same way, it was felt that the religious organisation of the day in Western Europe and the prevailing religious ideas and notions of doing business came in the way of the growth of trade industry and industry. Religion itself was connected with a feudal system in many ways, and the church, as I've told you, was the biggest feudal landlord. For many years, previous individuals and groups had risen to criticise and challenge the Roman Church, but they did not make any difference. How? Now, however, the whole rising bourgeoisie wanted a change, and so the movement for reform became a mighty one. All these changes and many others, we have already considered together, were the different aspects and phases of the revolution which brought the bourgeoisie to the front. The process seems to have been more or less the same in the Western European countries, but it took place at different times in different countries. Eastern Europe, meanwhile, and for long afterwards, was very backward industrially, and so no such change took place there. In China and India, there were also craft guilds and hosts of artisans and craftsmen. Industry was as advanced and more often so than in Western Europe, but we do not find there the growth of science at this stage as in Europe, nor is there the same kind of urge for popular freedom. In both countries, there were long traditions of religious freedom and local freedom in towns and villages and in guilds. People cared little for the king's power and autocracy, so long as they were not interfered with their local matters. Both countries had built up a social organisation which had lasted for a very long time and as for more stable than anything in Europe. It is perhaps the very stability and rigidity of the organisation which prevented growth. In India, we have seen disruption and the generation finally ended with the conquest of the north by the Mughal Babar. The people seem to have completely forgotten their old Aryan ideas of freedom and have become servile and resigned to any ruler. Even the Muslims who had brought a new life to the country seem to have become as degenerate and servile as the others. Thus, Europe, endowed with a freshness and energy with the old civilizations of the East, seemed to lack. Slowly steals ahead of them. Their sons go to the far corners of the world. The lure of trade and wealth draws her seamen to the Americas and Asia. In southeastern Asia, we saw the Portuguese put an end to the Arab empire as Malacca. They established outposts of the Indian coastline all over the eastern seas, but soon their majesty of the spice trade is challenged by two new sea powers, Holland and England. Portugal was driven away from east and her eastern empire, and trade perished. The Dutch take Portugal's place to some extent, and many of the eastern islands are occupied by them. In 1600, Queen Elizabeth grants a charter to the East India Company, a company of London merchants to trade in India, and 2 years later, the Dutch East India Company is formed. Thus begins the period of grabbing by Europe in Asia for a long time. This is almost confined to Malay and the Eastern Islands.